Hey guys, Spud here, as always, and today we're going to be going over how to fly a SID or DP here in DCS World. Now, SID stands for Standard Instrument Departure Procedure, and DP stands for Departure Procedure. This video will be a little bit longer because we're going to go over two methods of flying a SID here in DCS in your fighter jet, whether that's the FA-18 Hornet or any others. We're first going to go over how to fly a SID or DP using the raw data generated by the ground-based navigational aids from which SIDs and DPs are built and derived from. For the second part of the tutorial today, we're going to be going over how to use INS Waypoints to create an RNAV Overlay over the top of the SID or DP in order to make flying it much easier in the very fast-paced environment that is the cockpit of a fighter jet like our FA-18 here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay guys, we're at Nellis Air Force Base with a beautiful summer monsoon day for our demonstration on how to use SIDs and DPs here in DCS World. For our first demonstration here, we're going to be using the raw data generated from the ground-based navigation aids that are used to actually derive and build these SIDs and DPs that you'll find for different airports around the world. Now, the reason why we're doing this one to start off here is to show you guys that yes, it is possible to fly using the raw data in an aircraft like the FA-18, and also if you, for whatever reason, have a bent INS, or you're flying a jet that does not have an INS here in DCS World. So let's go ahead and bring up the departure that we're going to be using today, which will be the Dream 7 departure that we can see up here in the top left. And you'll also notice that we're using government format charts for today, and that's simply because they are going to be the most available charts that you can find out there for free on the internet without having to pay a subscription service for, say, like Jeppesen plates or something of that nature. So let's go through the plate to start off here, and we'll talk about how to actually use the plate to make flying this departure procedure as easy as possible. So we can see it is the Dream 7, and the number 7 means this is the 7th iteration of the Dream departure from Nellis Air Force Base, and it is the most up-to-date version of it. We can also see at the top right here that this is for Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is always important to check as well, because there could be duplicates between the names of departures if you're flying, say, all around the world, such as when you're flying a fighter jet here. At the top left here, we can also see all of the different radio frequencies that are associated with Nellis Air Force Base to have them right there at a quick glance, so that way we can make sure we're always talking to the correct ATC agency. Now up here at the top right here, we have a bunch of charts here and numbers for different performance figures for aircraft that are less performant than, say, the FA-18 that you're flying, or the F-16, F-15, Mirage F-1, whatever it might be. So for us in a fighter jet, these don't really necessarily apply to us, and you go ahead and skip it. Then down below, we have the profile view, which is a top-down view of what the procedure is supposed to look like. And if this looks like gobbledygook spaghetti to you, that's no problem. We'll go through how to actually read this and figure out what you're supposed to do. And sometimes, even for me, this can look very difficult to parse through exactly how I'm supposed to fly through the procedure. Thankfully though, down below on every DP or SID, we have a plain English description of what we're supposed to do to fly the procedure itself. So starting up at the top here, we want to make sure that we choose and follow the directions for the appropriate runway. We're going to be taking off on runway 3 left, which is the most useful runway, or the most used runway for large exercises at Nellis Air Force Base. And so we can see here that we're supposed to fly runway heading to intercept the LSV TACAN 028 radial then direct to the @ALF intersection to intercept the Boulder City VORTAC radial 344, then direct to the Juneau intersection, and we're going to cross Juneau at or above 17,000. Then when you see a word that is like then or thence or then fly with some ellipses at the end, you know that we need to skip to another section of this plain English route description. We can skip over, of course, take off from runway 3 right and take off from 21 left and right, and we can find the next ellipses that make sense for our departure. So here's the next ellipses down here, and we can see maintain flight level 190, then via assigned routing. So that means basically once we cross over the top of Juneau, we'll maintain 190, and then once we get in contact with, say, different departure controllers, different center controllers, and even the Nellis range controllers, will then be directed to fly basically as filed up to our Marshall point for our red flag, or to wherever else we need to go. The reason why we fly departure procedures, especially in a large force exercise like red flag, is so that way all of the controllers know exactly and can expect exactly where all those fighter jets are going to be going in a very uniform manner, so that way they can then be directed to where they need to go. So that way the aggressors can be shuffled off to the western side of the Nellis ranges, and us in blue air are going to be shuffled off to the eastern side of the range, things of that nature, to just kind of keep organized that big gaggle of 50 jets going out to fly a red flag. So with that, now let's talk about the profile view and follow this route description on the profile view. So we can see here that taking off a runway 3 left, we're going to follow that 028 radial all the way out to 11.5 DME to the @ALF intersection right here, at which point we'll turn left to a heading of 344, and we'll follow the Boulder City 344 radial all the way out to 44 DME at the Juneau intersection at 17,000 feet or above. Now, when you see different altitude readouts here on the plate, if you see the altitude with a line below, that means that you're going to fly at or above that altitude. However, if you see an altitude with the horizontal line above the altitude, that means that you're going to be flying to hit that altitude at or below that altitude. And that could be to keep you, say, underneath the approach path to another airport where lots of airliners are going to be landing, things of that nature. So now let's talk about how we're going to actually fly this departure procedure in the FA-18C Hornet here. Now, of course, as you guys know very well by this point, the Hornet is meant to be flown visually, with the pilot looking outside of the cockpit and looking through the HUD. And that means that we don't have multiple TACAN receivers that we can have multiple radials slotted into. So we're going to have to actually shuffle between the LSV TACAN and the Boulder City VORTAC pretty quickly, so that way we can be flying on the correct path out to the end over at Juneau. So what that means is the way I'm planning to fly this here is I'm going to have the LSV TACAN station loaded up on the 028 radial. We'll fly out to that, and then about 11.0 DME or so, I'm going to start making a left-hand turn out to a heading of 344, which should get me close enough to the 344 radial out of Boulder City that then I can go back to my UFC, reselect the Boulder City TACAN station, and of course set the 344 radial to then fly outbound on top of out to Juneau. And honestly, if you are a little bit off on this, it's okay, and it's more of a horseshoes and hand grenades kind of thing. And if there is a little bit of slop and you're not flying perfectly directly on top of these radials, it's not a big deal, and the controllers won't necessarily notice based off of how high of a fidelity the radar scope they're looking at is. However, the one thing we want to be very careful of is coming off of runway 3 left here, We want to make sure we're definitely flying on top of that radial, that 028 radial, so that way we're not drifting over into the departure path of runway 3 right if we were to have aircraft simultaneously taking off on the other side. So with that, let's go ahead and set things up to fly this departure procedure here in our Hornet. To make things a little bit easier for you guys to see, let's pull up the HSI on the left DDI here. Of course, we're not going to have waypoints selected, we're going to have TACAN selected. And so the LSV TACAN is on 12 X-ray. When you're looking at a departure procedure here and it just says, say, channel 12 or channel 114, you can basically expect that that's going to be on the X band, not the Y band. So keep that in mind because that can be a little confusing. So open up our TACAN here, we'll turn it on, and we'll enter in 12, enter. And we can see that the LSV TACAN station is identified by the systems of our Hornet. And we'll go ahead and enter in a course line of 028. There we go, we can see the course line drawn coming out of the LSV TACAN station to where we need to be pointed at. And I'm going to squeeze the scale down to 5 nautical miles to allow myself a little bit of an easier and better graphical description here to make sure I'm flying right on top of that 028 radial. Okay, so with that out of the way and we're all set up and ready to go there, we are good to actually fly it. So we can see, of course, we have a good view of the DME from the LSV TACAN station. And just to kind of recap, once we hit about 11.0 DME from LSV, we're going to start to make that left-hand turn off to a 344 heading. We're going to reset over to the Boulder City VORTAC and fly the 344 radial out of there. Just double checking here, there is no altitude restriction here at ATLAF. The first altitude restriction is out here at Juneau at 17,000 or above, and then we'll pop on up to 19,000 for the top altitude of the SID. Because this is 17,000 or above, it doesn't matter if we get up to 190 before Juneau, but we're going to stop at 190 because that is the top altitude, and then we'll be directed to climb if required for the rest of our flight. So we'll go ahead and get our takeoff clearance from the tower, and once we've got that, we will take on off. Definitely raining hard here. There must be quite a bit of a thunderstorm here over the top of Las Vegas. We'll check and make sure that final's clear, of course, as best as we can see it through our soaked canopy, and make sure that the runway is clear as well. Make sure we get nice and lined up on the center line here. Okay, and we are cleared for takeoff, so let's go ahead and go for it. Bring the throttles up to full mil, engine's looking good, release the brakes, and up into afterburner. Alright, there's our rotation. And we'll just let her gently fly on off. Gears coming up. Flaps coming up. And it looks like we popped out of the rain there. And we just passed a beam, the LSV TACAN station. And we're just going to be flying runway heading here, maintaining about 350 knots of indicated airspeed. And we're going to try and climb up at about 7.5 degrees nose up to allow any wingmen that might be flying with us to join up on us pretty easily. I'm going to trim out the jet a little bit there for some wind correction. And we'll just come slightly to the right to track the 028 radial out of the LSV TACAN station. Looking on our HSI there, that's looking pretty darn good. And we can see the arrow is nice and centered up in our velocity vector, so I think we are good to rock and roll there. Got about 5 nautical miles to go for our left-hand turn to 344. And just checking our plate really quick ahead of time. Yep, Boulder City is channel 144 on our TACAN. Different layers of clouds sure make the Nevada map look nice, that's for sure. Come back left a little bit to keep tracking the correct TACAN radial. Alright, there's 11 DME, so let's go ahead and start that left-hand turn to a heading of 344. And if you can multitask, we can of course start to bring in 114 for the Boulder City TACAN. And pop in a course line here of 344. Oop, there it is. And looks like we're already blown past it a little bit. That's no big surprise, seeing as we're flying a nice fast FA-18. This will be a lot easier to fly the raw data from in an aircraft like, say, the upcoming C-130 Hercules. Okay, we'll go ahead and roll out here at 330 degrees to re-intercept the 344 radial coming out of Boulder City. And it looks like Juno is at a 44 DME from Boulder City. Perfect, we'll keep that in mind. Alright, we're getting closer to our radial. So we'll start making just a nice gentle turn back to 344. Again, this is a bit of a horseshoes and hand grenades kind of situation. As long as you're close enough, you're good. And we're getting close to the top altitude of the SID, so we'll start to level off here at 190 degrees. Or 190 for our flight level, I should say. There she is. And then, if I were a lazy pilot, like I am, I'll just go ahead and pop the barometric altitude hold on to make things as easy as possible for me. And there we go. We're now at the top of the SID, that top altitude of flight level 190 that we saw up the top there and down at the bottom in the textual description of the SID. Now 350 indicated, that's perfect. Let's go ahead and pop on auto throttles. And we're flying directly right on top of that 344 radial coming out of Boulder City. Almost to the end of the SID here. Okay, 2 miles to go. At this point, the departure controllers, the center controllers, the range control controllers will already be swapping us through the different comms ladder frequencies. And at this point, if not earlier, we'd probably then get told to fly our filed route. So for our filed route, that's going to be in our waypoints here. So we'll select waypoint 1 to head on out to our Marshall point. And we'll go ahead and kick the autopilot off and climb on up to our briefed marshalling altitude. And that's how you fly a departure procedure from the raw data coming out of the ground-based navigation aids for the SID. So let's go ahead and jump on over and go over the easy way to fly one of these DPs or SIDs and create an RNAV overlay with INS Waypoints on top of the SID itself. Okay guys, we're here in the mission editor to create that RNAV overlay over the top of the Dream 7 departure to make flying this SID as easy as humanly possible for us in the cockpit. which is always important because things happen very fast in fighter jets. So the way we would do this is to create two waypoints that represent the @alf intersection here between the 028 radial from LSV and the 344 radial from the Boulder City TACAN station, and then the Juno intersection up here at 44 DME on the 344 radial from Boulder City. It should be relatively simple. However, there's a really huge gotcha here that can really mess you up when it comes to actually creating that RNAV overlay for the SID with your INS waypoints. And that is the fact that here on the profile view of our departure procedure, and of course in the textual description, these radials and headings are all in magnetic. And in DCS World, specifically in the mission editor, the ruler tool here shows everything in true heading as opposed to magnetic heading. So what that means is when we take, say, our 028 radial here to create the @alf intersection, we're going to need to take this radial and add 12 to it in order to make sure that we put our INS waypoints in the correct spots. Every area on Earth has a different magnetic deviation, and we can see that deviation down here in the bottom left side of the mission editor on the very bottom bar here where it shows us that magnetic deviation. And so it shows that when it comes to magnetic headings, we need to add 12 to it in order to get a true heading from a magnetic heading. And if we were going from true to magnetic, we would need to subtract 12 from it. So that's something that's very important to note. In some maps on DCS, the magnetic deviation is so small, it doesn't matter. But here in Nevada, it makes a big, big difference. So let's start off here and we'll create our first waypoint and we'll call it @alf here to represent our intersection on the departure procedure. So first, we're going to place our mouse right in the middle of the LSV TACAN station, and we're going to string our ruler tool out here to 11.5 DME on a 040 heading in order to place our waypoint correctly. So it looks like that waypoint is going to be right on top of the lowercase e in Garnet there, here on the map. So let's add a waypoint to our flight plan right on top of there. So we'll add that waypoint right on top there, perfect. And we'll call it @alf. And there is no altitude restriction, so we don't need to really pop in an altitude in there. We'll just zero it out as best we can to make it easy. Next, for our next waypoint, we're going to have to add in Juno here on the 344 radial from Boulder City at a DME of 44. So 344 plus 12 is going to be 356 degrees coming out of the Boulder City vortex. So there's the Boulder City vortex. So we'll put our mouse on top of the vortex there, and we'll use the ruler tool and we'll stretch it out at 356 all the way out here to 44 DME. There we go. So 356. So we can see it's not absolutely perfect based off of our math here, but it's close enough that we can basically guesstimate that the Juno intersection coming out of Boulder City here is going to be right in this vicinity right here. So we'll go ahead and get our next waypoint. We'll pop it in right about here, and we'll do another quick check. Coming out of Boulder City here. So we got the 344 radial, and we want to have it at 44 DME from Boulder City, just making sure we've got it correct here. 44 DME. So it looks like we missed it just a little bit, and it's looking pretty good. So we'll pop it in somewhere in this vicinity right here. So we'll move it just slightly. But honestly, that's kind of very nitpicky there. a ATC controller is really not going to notice that slight of a difference, and you're in the general vicinity of where you're supposed to be flying anyway, which is what the ATC controllers are looking for. You're definitely not going to get a phone number by having this waypoint just slightly off. So we'll go ahead and label this one Juno at 17,000. So we got Juno at 17,000, and we are ready to rock and roll to fly that same SID from our INS instead of using that raw data, and it should be much easier for us. Okay guys, we're back in the cockpit of our FA-18 in the same spot we were for the first demonstration, but this time we'll fly the SID the easy way using an RNAV overlay with our INS Waypoints. So we'll go ahead and open up the HSI here on our left DDI to illustrate things a bit better for you guys. We'll select waypoint, and we'll select our first waypoint, which we can see there is at ALF, just like we set up in the mission editor, which is the correct point here on the Dream 7 departure. And then we can see our waypoint 2, of course, is Juno, all the way out there in the exact same spot as it should be here on the Dream 7. So with that, we've got our takeoff clearance, and we are good to rock and roll. Of course, we'll check to make sure final's clear, check to make sure the runway is clear, and we should be good to go. One thing you can also do to give yourself a better little description or visual cue as to where the SID is going to take you is if you hit sequence button down here, you get a bit of a visual chart showing you where you're going to be flying on that SID and through, of course, the rest of your flight plan. We'll also zoom this in a little bit, maybe about a 20 nautical mile scale for the way we're flying it now should be perfect for us. And we'll just go ahead and take it on the roll. Push it up to full mil. Good to go. Full afterburner. There's our rotation. Gears coming up. Flaps coming up. Climb out about 7.5 degrees nose up once again. And this time, of course, we're just really looking to fly right on top of this dashed line instead of flying on top of a raw data radial from the LSV TACAN station, making things much easier for us here in the cockpit, especially when things are moving fast in a fighter jet. Man, having a little bit of weather here on the Nevada map sure makes the map look really pretty again. It's definitely a map that I'd love to see revamped and kind of revisited in the future here because it is such an awesome training map that so many different groups use. Okay, looking good, flying right over the top of our little dashed line, just as we should be. The ATC controllers at this point, looking at their radar scopes, have no idea where there's any difference between the way we flew it the first time and the way we're flying it now. Again, taking a look at the departure, we can see there is no altitude restriction at ALF intersection, so we're good there. Coming back to the left a little bit, right to our waypoints. And we can either auto-sequence or manually sequence to the next waypoint. Start the turn a little bit earlier this time, about 1 nautical mile from waypoint 1. And we'll manually sequence to waypoint 2. Trying to stay on top of our dashed line as well as we possibly can. Looks like we came off of it just a little bit. But again, it's not something that ATC is going to be worried about, and it's not something that's going to get you a phone number, that's for sure. So we'll go ahead and come a little bit further left on our heading, then 344 to re-intercept our desired course. And we'll come on back towards our waypoint. Once we can see our waypoint bug there is right at 344, which it is right now, so that's going to be perfect for us. And of course, because this is so much easier, we can spend more of those precious brain cells talking to ATC, coordinating with our wingmen, making sure they're joining up with us okay, making sure the jet's okay, potentially setting up any weapons or sensors that we might need, things of that nature. Right, there's 17,000, so we're met the at or above at Juno, so that's perfect. And we've still got 13 miles to spare. Okay, coming up to 190 on the altitude, so we'll go ahead and start leveling off. That kind of blew through it once again, so we'll come back on down. And there we go, we're at about Mach 0.75, so we'll go ahead and turn on our ATC. And at this point, we're at the top altitude of the Dream 7, so we're good to go there. And of course, if you are flying an RNAV overlay of the departure procedure, once you've got the autopilot turned on, you can of course turn on coupled mode, and the jet will automatically fly you to Juno intersection here, or whatever intersection you are flying towards on the particular departure procedure you are flying. And of course, at this point we'll have gone through multiple different agencies on the comms ladder for our mission, brought through departure to potentially a center controller, and of course on out to the Nellis range controllers. And once we pass Juno here, we will probably be directed to basically just own navigation as filed, basically, out to your next waypoint. So we'll go ahead and manually cycle to waypoint 3. And of course, coupled mode on our autopilot here is just going to fly us on out to our Marshall point. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope this helps you guys out and kind of sheds some light onto fly SIDs and DPs here in DCS World with the very fast motion that is a fighter jet, which is very different from the ways, say, airliners would fly them in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So thanks for watching. Please leave a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Fly safe out there and enjoy this beautiful game.